Welcome back. Here we are at day 4 of the 4-day embellishment walkthrough. Today is the holy grail of embellishments. This is one that many of my students spend weeks on trying to nail down and get accurate on this particular thing. There's a lot going on in this embellishment. We're talking about the bark or barking. So we're going to focus on getting one clean bark because just like we talked about with the flutter versus the pop, so it helps if you just focus on one clean bark. If you try to do too many of them, you get into like this barking flutter and then it doesn't sound clean. So what is the bark? Let me play it for you, and then I want to break it down into, bite-sized pieces so you can easily digest exactly what's happening. So we'll cover what my breath is doing, and then what my fingers are doing, and some things to kind of keep in mind as you're doing this that might be common roadblocks. So here we go. I'll play it for you. All right, so barking, as you can see, is pretty much destined for all holes closed on the flute. This is a technique that I commonly use for the root or fundamental note of the flute, and it works really well when you're kind of ending phrases, but you can also end your song with it as well, and you can throw it in there kind of as a wild card as well. If you listen to songs that I've recorded, you'll see that there are a multitude of places where this technique is used. So now I want to break it down for you, and I want to focus on the breath work of this, because this is probably one of the hardest things that come from this. And this is also a great place, if you haven't seen, I have a video on vibrato on YouTube, so I recommend you checking that out as well. We're really working with muscles and learning to breathe better with the flute, strengthening some of those muscles. So this can take some time to develop. You could sound a little weak when it comes to that initial burst of breath that we're working with. The one thing you want to be cautious of is to not use your tongue when you play the bark. Commonly, you just have this push that you want to do and it gets intense, and commonly you may want to tongue that note, so stay away from that if you can. We want to just keep the breath going. So it's kind of opposite of the yip, a technique that we covered yesterday. So with the bark, I'm going to hold all holes closed here, and with this exercise you may find that your flute is wanting to crack into the upper octave. If that happens, you'll want to kind of be mindful of the shape of your mouth, and with that go more into an ah state where your cheeks are a little bit thinner and your mouth is open, your tongue relaxed. If you're in ooh shape, everything is tightened up. So here we go again. What I'm looking for is to keep the breath constant, and then just a burst of breath and it goes back to where it was. Okay, so you can see that you keep the breath going. If you kind of have this burst of breath and then the air stops, work on this part first. It's really important that you have that that memory, that muscle memory built up to where you can make that sound, all the way through. You have breath, and then you just have that peak of burst of breath, and that's coming again from that burst of breath, like you were to blow out a birthday candle all of a sudden in one big breath, but you have breath coming behind it. So here's the second part. The second part is all about the fingers. Here we go. All right, so with the fingers, what I'm doing here is, like I said, this is primarily for all holes closed on the flute. So what I want to do is, I'm not going to be lifting all 3 of the bottom fingers and exposing those bottom 3 holes. Instead, I'm going to keep my ring finger on the flute here, and this is going to act as an anchor or a pilot. So when you do all 3, and again, remember, we're not lifting way up here. even if I keep that anchor on, I'm not lifting way up here. I want to stay close, because the closer I am, the faster I can be. So here we go. With this, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to lift these two together, okay? And I'm going to lift them off the flute very quickly. Now with this exercise, I'm not using any of that burst of breath. It's just going to be constant breath. I want you to hear and practice this part by itself. Here's a side view of that. Okay, now it's time to put it all together. So we have that breath impacting, and we have those fingers launching off of the flute and back on to get that sound known as the bark. Now, if I could give you just one tiny piece of advice with this, is that commonly students ask me, what comes first? The chicken or the egg? What comes first? Do the fingers lift off, or does the breath happen first? And a lot of it honestly happens at the same time. But if I were to slow this down and be really cinematic and slow with this whole thing, act as if your breath is blowing the fingers off of the holes, and then you have to regain that note. So I don't want to confuse you in saying that, yes, the breath comes first and then the finger. You're going to have to work with this and what really works best for you. But in my experience and the flutes that I've played, this is typically how it happens. And if you slow it down and eventually speed it up, this is the process. Now also, something to consider with this is the amount of back pressure that your flute has. For example, back pressure means resistance. If you're blowing into your flute and you feel like the breath isn't going through the flute as efficiently, or your mouth feels like it's filling up with breath, or you have to exhale before going on to the next phrase or exercise or whatever you're playing, your flute has a lot of back pressure, a lot of resistance. There's a benefit to this, and I'll address this in other trainings and tutorials, but if a flute has little to no back pressure, little being the preference for me, then your breath techniques become more effective and efficient. You don't have, you don't have choppy airflow, and so what you do with your breath is instant, like that. It's flowing efficiently. So just something to consider as you practice this technique with different flutes in your collection. Some flutes will have more back pressure than others, and this is a technique that will be affected by it. The benefit to working with other flutes with resistance and back pressure and techniques is that you become a more versatile flute player. So when you go to pick out your next flute at a festival or a convention or something like that, and you pick up that flute and you go through that basic scale for the first time, you know exactly how this flute is going to respond. Your brain's going to say, you know what, I've dealt with this before, and I know how this works. So I don't want to digress too much, but I want you to know that back pressure will make a difference. So try this on a couple of different flutes if you have that available. If not, just hunker down, be patient with this. This is a technique that takes a while to develop, and you will be working with timing of this for a while. And who knows, you may be the person in my workshop that just breezes right through it. So that's a wrap on our 4-day embellishment walkthrough. I want to thank you for tuning into this. I hope that you've gotten something new out of this. And for those of you who have done some of these techniques before or have worked with me, I hope that this has been an experience where it's just shed some new light on some things, or maybe encouraged you to pick it back up and get back to practicing with these particular embellishments. These are 4 common embellishments that I would use in my flute playing. There are a couple of other simple ones that I addressed in a YouTube video, 5 tips to dramatically improve your flute playing. So see below for a few more videos on YouTube, some tips and some of those tutorials, and know that I am launching a series of tutorials online, and I hope you'll stay tuned for those. My goal is to help you become more emotive and efficient with your flute playing. We all have music in us, and I want to help you understand that you can get that out. You need to get that out, and you need to share that music with others, or just for yourself, for self-satisfaction, to know that you can bring beautiful music into the world. So the other thing to know is, please don't share this link with other people. Share the original link. I'll post that below if you want them to go through this process. They need to start at the beginning. So if they just jump in for this one technique, they build on each other. So share the original link. I'll be sure to put that below, and I appreciate it very much. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Keep on fluting.